Before we begin tonight's story, if you find value in these quiet accounts from the edge of the known world, please take a moment to support our journey together. It helps us continue exploring these mysteries. Now, let us turn our minds to the deep, silent woods of the North. My name is Elias Thorne, and for 15 years I have been the sheriff of Humboldt County, California. It is a title that carries a weight different from what you might expect in the city. Here, the jurisdiction is not just over people, but over a landscape that has stood since before the first maps were drawn. We have the redwood forests, ancient giants that rise like pillars of the earth itself, creating a canopy so high and dense that entering the woods feels like stepping into a cathedral. We have the Lost Coast, where the mountains fall steeply into the Pacific, and rivers that wind through valleys untouched by modern hands. In my time here, I built something I held dear, a quiet record that became the foundation of my life. Every missing person case that crossed my desk, I solved. Every hiker who lost the trail, every elderly wanderer confused by the fog, every child who strayed too far from camp, I brought them all home, 100%. It was a perfect record, and in the unpredictable world of search and rescue, that is a rarity. I knew this land. I had grown up breathing its air, learning the shifting moods of the weather and the hidden paths that animals use. I believed the forest, and I had an understanding. I respected it, and in turn, it allowed me to find those who were lost. But pride is a heavy coat to wear in the wilderness. The forest is vast, and its memory is long, far longer than the span of a single human life. I worked closely with a man named Silas Vance, our search and rescue coordinator. Silas was a legend in these parts, a man with 30 years of experience and eyes that missed nothing. He moved through the undergrowth with a silence that seemed to belong to the trees themselves. He had taught me that the key to finding someone was not just to look, but to listen, to feel the rhythm of the woods and notice when it was broken. There was a peace in those early years, a sense of order. I felt that if I was diligent enough, if I cared enough, I could keep everyone safe. I did not know then that there are corners of this world that do not follow our rules. I did not know that my perfect record was about to be challenged by something that defied explanation. It was late September of 2020 when the change came. The summer crowds had gone, and the forest was settling into its autumn silence. The air was crisp, the light golden and slanted. It was a time of year I loved most, a time of quiet beauty. But as I would soon learn, beauty and danger often walk the same path in the redwoods. And the forest was waiting to show me that some things once lost are not simply misplaced, they are taken by something much older than us all. The call came in just as the morning fog was beginning to lift from the valley floor. It was a calm morning, the kind that usually promises a slow day. But the voice on the radio was tight with controlled panic. A child was missing. Her name was Lily Harper, 8 years old. She had vanished from a family campsite in Prairie Creek Redwood State Park. Her parents, Sarah and Mark, were from the city, visitors who had come looking for a weekend of peace. Sarah told me later that she had turned her back for only 5 minutes to organize their breakfast supplies. When she turned back, the space where Lily had been playing was empty. I arrived at the scene in 40 minutes, meeting Silas there. The atmosphere at the campsite was heavy, the air thick with the parents' distress. Sarah was weeping softly, holding a small pink jacket to her chest. Mark was pacing, his eyes scanning the impenetrable wall of trees surrounding them. She knows not to wander, he kept saying more to himself than to us. She knows the rules. I had heard it so many times. The forest has a way of inviting you in. A sunbeam hitting a fern, a butterfly drifting on the breeze. It pulls you forward, step by step, until the path behind you disappears. We organized the search immediately. 12 of us, a mix of volunteers and rangers, moving in a standard grid pattern. We marked our starting point and began to sweep outward. The fog will return by evening, Silas warned, checking the sky. We have a window of 6 hours. We moved into the woods. I took the northern sector with Silas. The canopy here was dense, filtering the light into a soft, green twilight. Sound was dampened by the moss and the massive trunks of the redwoods. We searched for 3 hours, our eyes combing every inch of forest floor for a footprint, a broken twig, anything. But there was nothing. It was as if Lily had simply ceased to exist. Then Silas stopped. We had entered a small clearing deep off the trail. He stood perfectly still, staring ahead. "Elias," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Don't move." I followed his gaze. In the center of the clearing, standing completely alone, was a staircase. It was a wooden flight of 10 steps, leading nowhere. It wasn't a ruin. It looked sturdy, though weathered gray by time. It had no foundation, no connecting walls. It simply rose from the ferns and ended in the air. It looked like an error in the landscape, something that belonged to a house but had been dropped into the wild. "What is that?" I asked, stepping forward. Silas grabbed my arm, his grip hard. "Do not go near it." I looked at him. Silas Vance, a man who had faced storms and floods without flinching, looked terrified. "We marked this spot," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "We mark on the GPS and we go around. We do not touch it. We do not climb it." "Silas, it's a structure. Maybe she's there," I argued. "She isn't," he said with a certainty that chilled me. "Elias, listen to me. There are things in these woods that we don't talk about. Search and rescue teams have found these stairs for decades. They appear and disappear. But the rule is absolute: never climb them." He refused to explain further in that moment, but the fear in his eyes was real. We circled wide around the clearing, leaving the staircase standing silent in the mist. But as we walked away, I couldn't shake the image of it. And more importantly, I couldn't shake the feeling that my perfect record and Lily Harper's safety hung in the balance of that impossible object. We returned to base as the fog rolled in empty-handed. Sarah's devastation broke my heart. "You'll find her tomorrow?" she asked. "We will," I promised. But as I looked back toward the dark tree line, for the first time in my career, I wasn't sure if it was a promise I could keep. The forest had changed. It was no longer just a place of geography. It was a place of secrets, and we had just stumbled upon its deepest one. The evening fog had settled deep into bones of the valley by the time we returned to the outpost, a heavy, suffocating blanket that turned the world into a gray void. The drive back was silent. Silas sat in the passenger seat, staring out into the nothingness, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. I could feel the weight of his unsaid words filling the cab of the truck, pressing against the windows like the mist itself. We had left the search area, but in my mind, I was still standing in that unnatural clearing, looking at the weathered wooden steps rising into the empty air. The image wouldn't leave me. It sat in the back of my thoughts, a splinter of impossibility that I couldn't pull out. We arrived at the station, a small building that usually felt like a sanctuary of order and logic. Tonight, however, the fluorescent lights hummed with a harsh, artificial quality that felt alien compared to the profound silence of the woods. I poured 2 cups of coffee, the dark liquid steaming in the cool air, and set one down in front of Silas. He didn't reach for it immediately. He just looked at the steam rising, twisting into shapes that vanished as quickly as they formed. "Tell me," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet room. "You said there are always more. You said it's a rule." Silas sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the exhaustion of 30 years. He picked up the cup, warming his hands as if the chill of the clearing had followed him inside. "It is not something you will find in the training manuals, Elias. It is not something we write in the official reports. But ask any of the old-timers, the ones who have walked these ridges since before the highways were widened. They know." He took a slow sip, his eyes distant. "We find them in the deepest parts of the forest. Sometimes they are made of brick, sometimes stone, but usually wood, like the one we saw today. They are never connected to anything. No ruins, no foundations, no overgrown paths leading to a front door that no longer exists. They are just there, Stairs to nowhere. I leaned back against my desk, crossing my arms. It has to be an art installation. Or a prank. Someone hauling lumber out there to mess with people. Silas shook his head slowly. Think about the wood. Elias, think about the weathering. That staircase wasn't built last week. It wasn't built last year. The moss on the risers, the way the grain has raised. It has been there for decades. And yet, we patrolled that exact sector 2 years ago. It wasn't there then. He looked at me directly, his gaze steady and unsettling. The forest changes. You know this. Paths shift. Trees fall and alter the landscape. But these, they are different. And the rule came from experience. Hard experience. He began to tell me a story, his voice dropping into a cadence that felt more like a campfire tale than a briefing, yet devoid of any theatricality. It was a story from the 1970s, back when he was just starting out, green and eager. There had been a search for a missing hiker in the high country. The team had been sweeping a ridge when they found a staircase, a spiral iron set standing amidst the pines. A young volunteer, curious and dismissing the warnings of the older men, had climbed it. He wanted a better vantage point, he said. He wanted to see above the brush. He went up, Silas said softly. He waved to us from the third step. He called out that he could see the creek. And then he took the last step to the small platform at the top. Silas paused, tracing the rim of his cup, and he wasn't there anymore. He fell? I asked, though I already sensed the answer. No, he didn't fall. He just ceased to be in our view. One moment he was standing there, the sunlight catching his jacket. The next, empty air. We shouted. We searched the ground around the base for hours, thinking maybe he had slipped and rolled. Nothing. It was as if he had stepped through a curtain. The room felt colder. Did you find him? He walked out of the woods 3 days later, Silas continued. He was miles from where the stairs were. He was unharmed, but different. He insisted he had only been gone for 10 minutes. He asked why we had set up such a large camp, why everyone looked so tired. He thought he had just stepped down from the platform and walked back to us. But for us, 3 days had passed, and there was something else. Silas looked up at me, his eyes dark. He was wearing his jacket, but his shirt underneath, it was wrong. It was a brand that hadn't been made since the 50s. And in his pocket, he had a ticket stub for a cinema show from 1952. He couldn't explain it. He didn't even remember putting it there. He just kept saying the light looked different up there. I sat in silence, trying to process what he was saying. It sounded impossible, the kind of folklore that grows in isolated places. But Silas was a man of facts, a man who dealt in coordinates and topography. He was not a storyteller. He was a witness. We marked them, Silas said, finishing his coffee. We mark them, we avoid them, and we pray that the missing people we are looking for didn't find them first. Because if Lily Harper climbed those stairs, Elias, if she went up, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The implication hung between us, heavy and unresolved. If the stairs were a door and she had walked through it, where was she now? Or perhaps more accurately, when was she? I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my bed listening to the wind move through the trees outside, a sound that usually lulled me to sleep, but now sounded like a whisper. I thought about the footprints we hadn't found. I thought about the silence in that clearing. And I thought about the promise I had made to Sarah and Mark Harper. I had told them I would bring their daughter home. I had never broken that promise. The idea that a wooden structure in the middle of nowhere could be the thing that defeated me was unacceptable. By the time dawn broke, turned the sky a pale, bruised purple, I had made a decision. I drove back to the station, my mind set. Silas was already there, looking as if he hadn't slept either. He saw the look on my face and sighed. "We have to go back," I said. "We have to check the area around the stairs again. If she climbed them, maybe she fell nearby. Maybe she is hurt and hiding. We cannot leave that stone unturned." You want to go back to the clearing? Silas said, not a question. I have to know. Silas. I can't look her parents in the eye and tell her we searched everywhere if we avoided the one thing that stands out. He nodded slowly, resigned. Okay, but I am coming with you. And we bring rope. If we're going anywhere near that thing, we are tethered. We take no chances. We assembled a small team, just the two of us and two other senior volunteers who knew enough not to ask questions. We drove back to the trailhead in silence. The morning was damp, the air thick with the scent of wet pine and decay. As we hiked back in the woods, following our own tracks from the day before, I felt a sense of foreboding I had never experienced. The forest felt watchful. The birds were quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. We reached the coordinates. The clearing opened up before us, shrouded in the morning mist. And there it was, the staircase, standing exactly as we had left it, indifferent and impossible in the flat light of morning. It looked even more stark. The wood was gray and fibrous. The steps worn by the passage of unseen feet. Set up the perimeter. Silas ordered the volunteers, keeping them back at the tree line. Elias and I will check the immediate area. We approached slowly. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a physical rhythm of anxiety. I scanned the ground, looking for anything we might have missed yesterday. And then I saw them, in the soft, damp earth near the base of the stairs. There were impressions, small, faint but unmistakable, the tread of a child's sneaker. Silas, I breathed. He came to my side and looked down. His face went gray. They lead right to it. The tracks emerged from the ferns, stumbled slightly, and then proceeded directly to the bottom step of the wooden structure. And there they stopped. There were no tracks leading away, no signs that she had walked around it, just a straight line to the first step. She climbed them. I said, the realization settling in my stomach like a stone. She climbed them, Silas. He stared at the empty space at the top of the stairs. Then she isn't here anymore. I'm going up, I said. No, Silas said firmly, grabbing my shoulder. Elias, you heard the story. You don't know where it goes. You don't know if you can come back. She is 8 years old, I said, turning to face him. She is 8 and she is alone and she is scared. If there is even a chance that she is just stuck somewhere or disoriented, I have to go. I can't leave her. Silas looked at me for a long moment. He saw the resolve in my eyes, the same resolve that kept me searching through storms and nights for 15 years. He knew he couldn't stop me. Rope, he said finally. We tied around your waist. I hold the other end. If anything feels wrong, pressure, sound, light, you come back immediately. Do you understand? I understand. We secured the climbing rope. It was a lifeline, a thin orange cord connecting me to the world I knew. Silas double-checked the knot, his hands moving with practiced efficiency, though I could see a slight tremor in his fingers. He handed me a radio. Keep talking, he said. Don't stop talking. I turned to the stairs. They looked ordinary, just wood and nails. But standing at the base, I felt a hum in the air, a vibration that I felt in my teeth rather than heard with my ears. I took a breath, steadied myself, and placed my foot on the first step. The wood of the first step felt solid beneath my boot. There was no creak, no give, despite the weathered appearance of the timber. It felt grounded, real, just a piece of construction in the middle of nature. I exhaled, trying to release the tension that had coiled tight in my chest. Step 1, I said into the radio, my voice sounding tinny in the damp air. Solid, normal. Copy. Silas's voice came back, close and anxious. Proceed with caution. I took the second step, then the third. With each upward movement, I expected something to change. I expected the air to shimmer or the sounds of the forest to warp. But everything remained frustratingly mundane. I could see the tops of the ferns now, the texture of the bark on the nearby redwoods. It was just a staircase, I began to feel foolish. Perhaps this was all just hysteria, the result of tired minds and local legends mixing in the dark. Step 5, I reported. I am halfway up. View is clearing. Just trees, Silas. Just trees. Keep your eyes open, he replied. It's the top that matters. I reached step 7, and that was when the world tilted. It wasn't a physical sensation of movement, like an earthquake. It was deeper, more internal. It felt like the drop in your stomach when an elevator descends too quickly, but intensified. My ears popped painfully. The air, which had been cool and damp, suddenly lost its moisture. It became dry, crisp, and charged with static. Silas, I said, gripping the handrail. The wood under my hand felt different now. Smoother, warmer. Pressure change. Significant. Come down. Silas's voice crackled, but it sounded distant, as if he were speaking from the bottom of a well. Elias, abort. I see something. I whispered. At the top of the stairs, the air was rippling. It looked like heat haze on a highway in summer, a distortion that blurred the trees behind it. But through the blur, I could see clarity. The fog that had been wrapping around us was thinning at the top of the stairs, revealing a quality of light that was sharper, brighter. I took step 8. The sound of the forest cut out. Instantly, one moment. I could hear the wind in the branches and the distant call of a jay. The next, silence. A profound, heavy silence that pressed against my eardrums. Silas, I said. There was no answer. The radio was dead weight in my hand. I looked down. The rope was still tied around my waist, trailing down the steps. I could see the orange line disappearing into the fog below, but I couldn't see Silas. I couldn't see the volunteers. The bottom of the staircase seemed to dissolve into a gray soup. I was alone on an island of wood, suspended between two worlds. I should have gone back. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to run down into the safety of the mist. But then I saw a flash of color on the platform at the top. Pink. The same pink as the jacket Sarah Harper had been clutching. Lily! I shouted. My voice didn't echo. It was absorbed by the air. I took the last 2 steps quickly, driven by the need to reach her. My boot hit the top platform and the transition was complete. The dizziness hit me like a wave, forcing me to drop to one knee. I gasped for breath, the air tasting different here. Cleaner, smelling of pine resin and something else, something old like dust and parchment. I looked up. I was still in the forest. The redwoods were still there, towering above me, but they were different. The undergrowth was not the dense wall of ferns I had just left. It was clearer, more open. The trees themselves looked younger. Their bark was less deeply furrowed, their canopies more vibrant, and the silence was not total. It was a silence of a deep wilderness, untouched and vast. Hello, I called out, standing up slowly. 20 yards away, standing near the base of a massive tree, was a small figure. She was facing away from me, looking up into the branches. Lily, I said again, softer this time. The figure turned. It was a little girl. She had Lily's face, the same nose, the same eyes that I had seen in the photos her parents gave me. But she wasn't wearing the pink jacket anymore. She was wearing a simple dress, made of floral fabric that looked faded and worn. Her hair was tied back with a ribbon, not the modern elastic band she had left with. She looked at me, her expression a mix of confusion and relief. "Mister," she said, "are you a ranger?" I walked toward her, my mind reeling. "I am the sheriff, Lily. I am here to take you home." She frowned. Home? I tried to go home. I climbed the stairs to look for the butterfly, and then I was here, and now I can't find a car. I can't find Mommy. I reached her and knelt down, checking her for injuries. She seemed unharmed, just scared. "It's okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We are going to find them. We just need to go back down the stairs." I tried, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I tried to go down. But it doesn't work. It just goes to more forest. I looked back at the staircase I had just climbed. It was standing there just as before. The rope was still tied to my waist, leading down the steps. I gave it a tug. It was taut. "We are going to try together," I said. "Hold my hand." But as I stood up and looked around the wider forest, the breath caught in my throat. We weren't alone. Scattered through the trees, as far as I could see, were other staircases, dozens of them. Some were stone, crumbling and covered in vines. Some were brick, looking like pieces of old chimneys. Others were wood, like the one I had climbed. They stood in the forest, like monuments in a graveyard. And near some of them there were people. To my left, near a stone spiral staircase, a man was sitting on a log. He was wearing a flannel shirt and heavy work boots, his face buried in his hands. Further away, a woman in a long coat was pacing back and forth near a brick flight. They didn't look like hikers. They didn't look like campers. Their clothes were wrong, out of time, out of place. I realized then what Silas had been trying to tell me. The rule wasn't just about safety. It was about containment. I had climbed the stairs, and I had walked into a place where the lost things go. A place where the timeline of the forest had folded in on itself, trapping anyone unlucky enough to take that upward step. "Who are they?" Lily asked, clutching my hand tightly. "I don't know," I said, though a cold dread was settling in my heart. "But we aren't staying to find out." I led her back to the wooden staircase. "We are going down. Now." I picked her up, needing to feel her weight, to make sure she didn't slip away again. I stepped onto the platform and began to descend. I pulled on the rope, signaling Silas. "Silas!" I yelled. "I have her. Pull us in." But the rope just trailed loosely into fog below. I walked down the 10 steps, my heart pounding. I expected the pressure to change, the air to get damp again. I expected to see Silas's worried face at the bottom. I reached the bottom step and stepped onto the earth. The fog was gone. The clearing was empty. There was no Silas. There were no volunteers. The rope around my waist ended abruptly, cut cleanly about 10 feet away, lying on the ground like a dead snake. We were still in the forest, but it wasn't my forest. It wasn't 2020. The silence here was absolute, broken only by the sound of Lily's quiet sobbing and the wind moving through trees that watched us with indifference that felt ancient and profound. I checked my watch. The second hand was ticking normally, but when I pulled out my phone, the screen was dead. No signal, no satellite connection, just a black mirror reflecting my own terrified face. "Where are we?" Lily asked, her voice trembling. I looked at the cut rope, then at the endless trees, then at the strange, silent people wandering in the distance. "I don't know," I said, and for the first time in 15 years, I had no plan. "But we're going to walk. We're going to find a way." I didn't know then that walking would only lead us deeper into the mystery. I didn't know that we had stepped out of the world of maps and into the world of memory. All I knew was that the stairs were a trap, and we were now the latest prisoners of the silent woods. For a long time, Lily and I simply stood there at the base of the staircase, listening to the wind move through the branches. The sound was gentle, almost musical, but underneath it there was a sense of distance, as if the forest around us were part of a world we had not quite been invited into. I could feel her small hand wrapped tightly around my own, her fingers pressed into my skin like she was afraid I might disappear the way she had. I understood the feeling. Part of me still half expected to wake up back in my bed, with the radio quiet and the redwoods just a familiar outline through my window. "We're to take this one step at a time," I said softly. "We start with what we know." I checked my watch. The second hand went on ticking as it always had, unconcerned with where we were. Time, at least on my wrist, was behaving. I tried my radio again, cycling to channels, but all I found was a calm, steady wash of static. No voices, no distant calls from Silas. My phone lit up when I pressed a button. But the screen showed no signal, no network, only an empty bar where connection should have been. The GPS, when I switched it on, thought for a while and then gave me coordinates that made little sense. According to display, we were several miles west of where the staircase should have been, in a place that didn't line up with any of the usual search routes. It says we moved. I murmured more to myself than to Lily, but we only climbed 10 steps. "Is that bad?" she asked quietly. "It just means things are different here," I replied. "Different doesn't always mean bad. It just means we need to pay attention." I knelt down so I could look her in the eyes. There was fear there, yes, but also something else, an extraordinary steadiness for someone so young. "Lily, do you remember exactly what happened when you first saw the stairs?" I asked, every little detail you can think of. She nodded, swiping at her cheeks with the back of her free hand. "I was playing near the table," she said. "Mom was putting plates out, and Dad was making the stove work. There was a big yellow butterfly, really big, and I followed it. It went between the trees, and then I saw the stairs. They were just there. I thought maybe somebody had a tree house or something. So I went up to look to see if I could see the car. When I got to the top, it felt funny, like when you stay underwater too long, and then come up fast. My head felt full, and then the trees looked different, and the path was gone. I tried to go back down, but it just went to more trees. I tried 3 times. It never went home." The way she spoke about it was simple, almost matter of fact. Children often describe extraordinary experiences with clarity that adults struggle to match. It is only when we are older that we begin to add extra layers of complexity to what is already mysterious. I listened carefully, filing away every detail. The sensation of pressure, the change in the trees, the way the stairs refused to lead back where they had come from. These were not just strange events. They were clues. "Okay," I said gently. "Thank you. That helps a lot." I looked around at the forest. The redwoods here were slightly slimmer, their bark smoother. The undergrowth was less trampled, as if fewer feet had passed through this place. I saw no signs of trail markers, no bits of litter, no worn paths. It felt like a version of the woods that had not yet been fully touched by the steady presence of visitors. "If we cannot go back the way we came," I said slowly, "then we do what we always do in the forest. We look for something familiar. The land itself does not change as quickly as time does. Rivers, hills, the coastline, those are anchors. If we can find a creek near your campsite, we can follow it, even if it leads us to a different moment than the one we left." "Will my mom and dad be there?" Lily asked. Her question hung between us, full of hope and uncertainty. I wanted to give her an answer that would calm every fear, but honesty mattered just as much as comfort. "I don't know," I admitted quietly. "We might find the same place, but not the same day. But even if they are not there, we will find someone. And once we know when we are, we will know more about how to get you home." She nodded slowly, accepting that answer with a grace that humbled me. I took out my knife and walked to the nearest tree. On its smooth bark, I carved a small, simple mark, a vertical line intersected by 2 shorter strokes. It was not much, but if we ended up circling back, it would tell us that we had been here before. I made similar marks on a few other trunks as we began to walk, leaving a soft trail of human intention in a landscape that otherwise showed no sign of our presence. We moved slowly at first. I let Lily set the pace, watching her steps, listening to every rustle in the undergrowth. After some time, the faint sound of water reached us, a gentle murmur that grew into the clearer voice of a stream. The creek was narrower here than the one I knew near the campsite, edged with stones smoothed by years of flowing water. Still, it ran in the same general direction I expected. Geography, at least, was offering us a small kindness. We followed the water, walking alongside its winding path. Now and then, I would stop, check the sky through the canopy, and make another small mark on a tree. The forest seemed calm, almost serene, But beneath that calm there was an awareness. It was not hostile, but it was watchful, like a place taking careful note of our passing. After what felt like an hour, though my sense of time had grown uncertain, Lily tugged lightly at my hand. "Do you hear that?" she asked. At first, I only heard the consistent flow of the creek and the whisper of the wind. Then, underneath those natural sounds, I detected something else, muffled voices, low and indistinct. Human voices. Lily's eyes lit up with a quiet, cautious hope. "Stay close to me," I said softly. "We're going to go see who that is." We moved off the creek's edge, stepping carefully between the trees. The voices grew clearer, colored with a kind of frustration and disbelief that anyone who has ever been lost for more than a few hours would recognize. When we reached the edge of another small clearing, I saw them. 4 men stood together, all dressed in clothes that did not match the time I had left. Their shirts were sturdy work fabrics, tucked into denim trousers held up by wide belts. Their boots were thick and well-worn. One man wore a cap with a logo from a lumber company that, if memory served, had changed its design decades ago. They were studying a paper map spread out on a fallen log, gesturing to the trees around them with puzzled expressions. One of them, a tall man with broad shoulders and a calm, weathered face, looked up and spotted us. His eyes widened in surprise, but there was no hostility in his posture, only confusion and a kind of quiet relief at the sight of other people. "Hey!" he called out, lifting a hand. "You two all right? You lost." I stepped fully into the open, keeping my voice even and gentle. "We might be," I said, "but I think our kind of loss might be different from yours." The men exchanged glances. Lily squeezed my hand, pressing closer to my side. The tension in the air was not sharp or dangerous, but it carried the weight of many unspoken questions. The world around us had shifted, and we were standing at a meeting point between separate journeys, all of them crossing in a forest that belonged to more than one moment in time. The tall man studied us for a few seconds, his expression softened by curiosity rather than suspicion. There was something steady in his gaze that put me a little more at ease. This was someone used to long days outside, to changing skies and shifting plans. A man who knew that the land often had the last word. "You look like you could use a rest," he said. His voice had a rough, warm timbre, like someone who had spent years speaking over the sound of machinery and weather. "Name's Arthur. We've been trying to make sense of this place ourselves." I nodded and guided Lily a bit closer, keeping my movements calm. "I'm Elias," I said. "This is Lily. We came here by way of some very unusual steps." That seemed to catch his attention. He glanced briefly toward the trees, as if expecting to see something rise between them, then looked back at me. "You found them, too," he murmured. "Found what?" one of the other men asked, clearly still catching up. "You mean those stairs we saw on the ridge?" Arthur gave a small, patient shake of his head, as if this was a conversation he'd already had more than once. "We will get to that," he said. Then his eyes returned to me, sharp but not unkind. "Before we go any further, I need to ask you something that might sound strange. What year do you think it is?" The question was so direct that for a heartbeat I almost laughed, out of sheer surprise. Then I remembered the ticket stub in Silas's story, the shirt from another era, the way Lily described a shift in the air. The forest was not just space. It was a tapestry of different times overlapping. "In our world," I said carefully, "the year is 2020. The men stared at me. One of them gave a short, incredulous huff. But Arthur's reaction was quieter. He simply inhaled slowly, his shoulders lifting and falling with kind of resigned understanding. "Well," he said at last, "that would explain a few things on our end." "What year is it for you?" I asked. 1952, Arthur replied. "At least, that is when we were last sure of the date." The words settled into the clearing like a stone dropped into still water, sending gentle ripples through everything I thought I understood about our situation. 1952. Almost 70 years before the day I had started my shift back at the station, Lily looked up at me, trying to gauge the meaning of the numbers for my expression. I squeezed her hand gently, silently promising her that we would make sense of this, even if I didn't know how yet. Arthur gestured for us to join them by the log. "We are loggers," he explained as we drew closer. "We were working a claim some miles south of here, near a road that should be just beyond that ridge." He pointed toward the slope behind us. "Except the road is gone now, so is the camp. It is like the land folded back on itself and forgot we were here." "What happened?" I asked. He exchanged a glance with one of his companions, a shorter man with a cap pulled low. "We were on a break," Arthur said. "Some of the fellows went out a bit to stretch their legs. They came back talking about a set of wooden stairs standing out in the open. No house, no platform, just the stairs. One of the younger men, Jimmy, thought maybe they were part of some survey work, something the company had put in. He climbed up to have a look at the lay of the land. When he got to the top," Arthur paused, choosing his words with care. "He was gone, just gone, like he had stepped behind a curtain." The story echoed what Silas had told me, familiar in its structure but reshaped by different eyes, different years. "We went up after him," Arthur continued. "Not all of us, just a few. We thought maybe it slipped, or there was a platform we couldn't see from below. But when we reached the top, the woods had changed. The road wasn't there. The camp wasn't there. The hills looked younger somehow. We have been walking ever since, trying to find something we recognize." "You haven't?" I asked gently. He shook his head. "We found more stairs instead. Some of us tried those as well, hoping one set might take us back. But each time, if anything happened at all, we just ended up in another place that felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, but out of step, like a song played at the wrong speed." I listened, feeling each detail settle alongside the ones I already had, forming a pattern I didn't yet fully understand. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Even without a signal, it could still do one useful thing. "I know this will look strange," I said, "but I need you to see it." I woke the screen. The soft glow looked almost unreal in the filtered forest light. The men leaned in, their expressions shifting from skepticism to astonishment. I showed them a photograph. The image of Lily's campsite, her smiling face, the modern car in the background. Then I showed them the date, displayed on the device. 2 numbers and 4 digits, declaring a year they had never imagined standing inside. Arthur's fingers hovered just above the glass, not quite touching it, as if he was worried the image might vanish if he disturbed it. "It is like a radio and a camera had a child," he muttered. "You carry this in your pocket?" "In our time, yes," I replied. "Where I come from, people use these every day. They talk to each other across long distances, take pictures, check maps. They are ordinary there." I let the statement linger. But I suppose, standing here, we are quite far from ordinary. The shorter man gave a soft, disbelieving laugh, more from wonder than from doubt. "So you are really from the future," he said. "And that means we have been gone a long time." I saw the realization settle on their faces in different ways. For one, it was a quiet, internal calculation. For another, it was a widening of the eyes, an intake of breath. The idea that their families, their homes, everything they knew, had continued on without them for nearly 7 decades was a truth too large to digest in one moment. "I wish I had gentler news," I said softly. "But at least now we know the nature of this place. The stairs don't just take people away. They move them through time as well." Arthur nodded slowly. "That would explain why nothing is where we left it." He lifted his head and looked past me into the trees. "And I suppose that means those other folks we have glimpsed now and then, the ones with the odd clothes, they are from other years too." "Most likely," I agreed. "Different eras, different stories, all drawn to the same silent doorway." We stood there together for a while in a shared, thoughtful quiet. The forest around us seemed to lean in, listening. Life often contains periods where familiar rules no longer apply, where one must find a way forward without the comfort of old maps. This was simply a more literal version of that kind of season. "All right," Arthur said eventually, straightening his shoulders. "We cannot stand still forever. If these stairs are paths between times, then there must be some kind of pattern. We found only a few, but you may have seen others." "I did," I said. From the top of the one we climbed, I saw multiple staircases scattered among the trees. Different materials, different conditions. Some looked older than others, some more stable. If we begin to document them, map their locations and what they lead to, we might find a way to move with intention rather than by accident. He considered this, then gave a slow, thoughtful nod. "We mark each staircase we find," he said. "We choose one person to test it, tethered as you did, and take careful note of where they end up. We treat each step as part of a larger journey, not as a single leap." His companions murmured their agreement, some of the earlier tension easing into a sense of shared purpose. Lily, who had been listening quietly, tugged at my sleeve. "Will one of them go back to my time?" she asked. I looked down at her, then back at the men from 1952. "That is what we're going to try to find out," I said. "We will look for the stairs that lead toward 2020. And if we find one that can take us there, you and I will go through first. If it works, we will send help back along the trail we discovered." Arthur met my gaze, understanding that this plan held both hope and uncertainty. "If there is a way forward," he said, "we will find it. None of us asked for this, but we are here now. We can either wait for force to decide our fate, or we can walk together and see what opens." The air felt a little lighter then, though the path ahead remained unclear. In that clearing, ringed by redwoods and marked by the gentle sound of the creek, a quiet agreement formed between people from different decades. We would share information. We would mark the unknown. We would treat the strange staircases not as curses, but as guiding threads in a tapestry of time that was far wider than we had imagined. And as the light shifted overhead, filtering to the canopy in soft, moving patterns, I felt a small but real sense of hope. The journey would not be simple. There would be many turns, many unanswered questions, but we were no longer wandering alone in the silent woods. We had become fellow travelers, bound together by a common wish, to find a path back to the moments and the people we had left behind. The afternoon light in the forest was beginning to deepen into the long shadows of early evening. We had made camp in a shelter hollow near the creek, a place where the ground was flat and the canopy offered a natural roof against the cooling air. The loggers, Arthur and his crew, were surprisingly adept at creating comfort from very little. They moved with an efficiency born of years in the woods, gathering dry wood, clearing a safe circle for a fire, and sharing what little food they had carried in their packs, tough, dried strips of meat and hard biscuits that had been meant for a simple lunch break back in 1952. I contributed the few granola bars I had in my pocket, which Arthur examined with polite curiosity before handing half of one to Lily. She ate quietly, sitting close to me, her eyes watching the flames dance. Fire, I realized, was perhaps the only thing that hadn't changed. It was the same warm, flickering companion in 1952 as it was in 2020, a constant in a world that had become fluid. We spent that first night talking, not about the mechanics of time or the physics of the stairs, but about the lives we had stepped away from. Arthur spoke of his wife, a woman named Martha, who baked bread every Tuesday and had a laugh that could fill a room. He spoke of his two sons, who would be grown men now, older than I was. The other men, Bill, Frank, and a quiet fellow named Thomas, share their own fragments of home. A girlfriend in Eureka, a new car just bought, a garden that needed tending. Their voices were soft, tinged with a melancholy that was heavy but not despairing. It was the sound of men who were still processing a loss they couldn't quite quantify. How do you mourn a life that hasn't ended, but simply moved out of reach? We have to be methodical Arthur said the next morning as we stamped out the embers of our fire. If we just wander, we'll only get more lost. We need a system. We agreed to treat the forest like a grid, albeit a shifting one. We would search for staircases, mark them, and test them. But we quickly discovered that the staircases were not merely passive doorways. They were fragile. We found our first new staircase about an hour into the hike. It was a spiral set made of wrought iron, looking like it belonged in a Victorian garden rather than a redwood grove. It stood in a clearing of ferns, elegant and incongruous. But as we approached, I noticed something wrong. The metal was not just rusted. It was flaking away, dissolving into red dust that floated on the breeze. Is it safe? Frank asked, eyeing the structure warily. There is only one way to know, I said. We used the rope Arthur carried, a heavy, braided line of hemp that felt rougher than my modern nylon climbing gear. I tied it around my waist, just as Silas had done for me. I volunteered to go first. I had already made one trip. I knew the sensation of the crossing. I climbed carefully. The iron steps groaned under my weight, a sound that set my teeth on edge. At the top, I felt the familiar pressure drop, the pop in my ears. I looked out and saw a version of the forest that was silent and gray. The trees stripped of their leaves as if in deep winter. But before I could fully step through, the staircase shuddered violently. "Come down!" Arthur shouted from below. I scrambled back down, jumping the last 3 steps. As my boots hit the earth, the iron staircase groaned one last time, and then simply collapsed. It didn't fall over. It disintegrated. The metal structure folded in on itself, crumbling into a pile of rust and dust in seconds. It was as if time had suddenly caught up with it, aging at hundreds of years in a single heartbeat. We stood in silence, staring at the pile of red dust. "They are breaking down," Arthur said quietly. "Whatever holds them here, it isn't permanent." That realization added a new layer of urgency to our journey. We weren't just searching for a way home. We were racing against the decay of the doors themselves. If the staircases all collapsed, we would be trapped in this in-between place, wandering the seams of time forever. We pressed on, moving faster now. We found another staircase made of stone, weathered and covered in moss. This one held. Thomas climbed it and reported seeing a forest that looked much like the one we were in, but with subtle differences in the vegetation. He came back down safely. "No cars," he reported. "No road sounds. Just wind." Earlier then, I theorized, maybe further back than 1952. We marked it, but moved on. We needed to go forward, not back. We needed the sound of the modern world, the hum of highways, the distant drone of aircraft. We needed 2020. By midday, we had found 5 more staircases. One led to a time of heavy rain and younger trees. Another led to a dense fog, where shapes moved in the distance that Arthur thought might be elk. But none of them felt right. None of them had that specific quality of light, that particular texture of the air that signaled my own time. And with each discovery, the sense of instability grew. We saw a wooden staircase leaning precariously to the left, its supports rotting away before our eyes. We saw a brick flight that had already lost its top 3 steps, ending abruptly in midair. The connections were fraying. The forest was trying to close its doors. It was in the early afternoon that we found the hikers. We heard them before we saw them, voices raised in argument, sharp and frantic. We followed the sound to a ridge overlooking a valley. There, standing near a set of concrete steps that looked like they belonged to a city park, were 3 people. A man and a woman in bright neon windbreakers, and a teenager in a denim jacket. They looked up as we emerged from the trees, their faces a mixture of fear and aggressive hope. "You!" the man in the windbreaker shouted. "Do you know where the hell we are? We've been walking for 2 days. The GPS is dead. The trail is gone." I approached them slowly, hands open to show I meant no harm. "We are in the same situation," I said. "We are lost too." "Lost?" The woman laughed, a brittle, hysterical sound. We aren't lost. We were on the trail. We saw the stairs. We climbed up to take a selfie. Just a stupid picture. And then this. She gestured wildly at the forest. My phone says it's 1993. That's impossible. It's 2020. Wait, I said, stepping closer. Your phone says 1993? No, she snapped. My phone is dead, but his. She pointed to the teenager. He has an old digital watch. He found it in his pocket. He doesn't even wear a watch. It says 1993. I looked at the teenager. He was staring at his wrist, pale and shaking. I didn't have this on me, he whispered. It was just there. We are from 2022, I told him. I am Elias. This is Lily. And these men, I gestured to Arthur and his crew. They have been here longer than us. The hikers from 2020, their names were Greg, Linda, and their nephew Josh, joined our group. Their arrival confirmed something I had suspected. The stairs were pulling people from various points in time, but the destination seemed to be this fluid, unstable central forest. A waiting room. A hub. We need to find a staircase that feels solid, Arthur said, looking at the growing group. One that feels anchored. How do we know? Linda asked, her voice trembling. We listen, I said. We listen for the world we know. We continued our search. The group moved more slowly now, burdened by the growing number of people and the weight of our shared confusion. But there was also a sense of solidarity. We were a caravan of the displaced, a family of circumstance. Late in the afternoon, we found it. It wasn't like the others. It was massive, built from whole logs of redwood, dark and imposing. It stood in a grove of ancient trees that seemed to lean away from it, creating a natural circle of respect. The wood was not rotting. It was polished smooth and deeply, richly red, and carved into the bottom step. Faint but legible was a date, 2020. This is it. I whispered, this is the one. Arthur walked up to it, running his hand along the railing. It feels awake, he said, different from the others. This is our way home, I said, turning to the group. This leads to 2020. But as I said the words, I saw the look on Arthur's face. It wasn't relief. It was profound, quiet sadness. And then I understood. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I looked at Arthur, then at Bill, Frank, and Thomas. I looked at the hikers, Greg, Linda, and Josh. And finally, I looked at Lily, who was holding my hand with a grip that hadn't loosened for hours. The staircase was marked 2020. It was a door to my time, to Lily's time, to the hikers' time. But it was not a door to 1952. Arthur, I said, my voice quiet. You know, don't you? He nodded slowly, not taking his eyes off the dark wood of the staircase. I suspected, he said. When you talked about the other stairs leading to different places, it stands to reason that this one leads to yours, not ours. We can find another, I said quickly, a desperation rising in my chest. We can keep looking. There has to be one for 1952. We found the ones for the other times. We just need to search more. Arthur turned to me, and the expression on his face stopped me cold. It was a look of a man who has already done the math and accepted the result. Look at the other stairs, Elias, he said gently. Look at how they are crumbling. Look at the rust, the rot. The doors are closing. If we spend days looking for a staircase that might not exist, or might already be gone, this one might fall too. And then you and the little one, you'd be stuck here with us. He gestured to the massive redwood staircase. This one is strong. It is anchored. It is your best chance. Maybe your only chance. But what about you? I asked, what about Martha? What about your boys? Arthur flinched just slightly, as if I had touched a fresh wound. If I go through that door, he said, I arrive in 2020. I would be, what, 100 years old? My wife would be gone. My sons would be old men. I would be a ghost, Elias, a man out of time, with no history, no home, no life. He looked at his crew. They were silent, their faces mirroring his resignation. They understood. To go forward was to lose everything just as surely as staying behind. We belong in 1952, Arthur said firmly. Or we belong here, looking for it. We can't go with you. The hikers, Greg and Linda, were looking at the staircase with hungry eyes. They didn't have the same conflict. For them, this was simply the exit. We're going, Greg said, stepping forward. We're going home. I couldn't blame them. But my heart was breaking for the men in flannel shirts and work boots who were choosing to stay in the limbo of the forest rather than step into a world that had left them behind. I can't just leave you, I said to Arthur. I promised I would help. Arthur placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. You are helping. You are saving the girl. That is the job, isn't it, Sheriff? You bring the lost ones home. She belongs in 2020. Her parents are waiting. Her life is waiting. Don't let her lose that because you're trying to save old ghosts like us. I looked down at Lily. She was looking up at me, her eyes wide and trusting. She wanted her mother. She wanted her father. She deserved to grow up in her own time, not wander forever in a forest of lost moments. Okay, I whispered, the word tasting like ash. Okay. We organized a departure. Greg, Linda, and Josh went first. We tied the rope around Greg's waist, just in case, though I think he would have climbed it without any safety line at all. He ascended quickly, disappearing at the top with a sudden shimmer of air. Linda followed, then Josh. They didn't come back down. The staircase held. Then it was our turn. I turned to Arthur. I wanted to say something profound, something that would bridge the gap between our decades. But there are no words for that kind of goodbye. I will never forget you, I said. I will look for your names. In the records, I will find out. I will remember you. Arthur smiled, a genuine, warm smile that wrinkled the corners of his eyes. You do that, Elias. And when you get back, take a moment, now and then, to sit in the quiet. Don't let the noise of that future drown you out. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It was a receipt, faded and soft with age. If you can, he said, find a woman named Martha Vance in Eureka. She's likely gone, but if she has kin, just tell them Arthur didn't leave because he wanted to. Tell them he was thinking of them. I took the paper, my hand trembling. I will. I picked up Lily. She wrapped her arms around my neck, burying her face in my shoulder. Ready? I asked her. Ready, she whispered. I stepped onto the first step of the Redwood staircase. It felt solid, immovable like the earth itself. I climbed, counting the steps. 1, 2, 3. At the 5th step, I looked back. Arthur and his men were standing in a line at the edge of the clearing, watching us. They raised their hands in a silent farewell. They looked like a photograph from a history book, sepia-toned and distant, fading into the background of the forest. 7, 8. The air pressure dropped. The sound of the wind changed. 9. The light shifted, becoming the sharp, clear light of a crisp autumn morning. 10. I stepped onto the platform. The world spun. The silence of the ancient forest was replaced instantly by a cacophony of sound. The thrum of a helicopter rotor overhead. The crackle of radios. The distant shouting of voices. I stumbled down the other side of the staircase, my boots hitting soft, familiar mud. We were back. We were standing in a clearing, but it wasn't the one we had left. It was filled with activity. Search and rescue personnel in bright orange vests were moving through the trees. A dog barked. "Sheriff," a voice shouted. I looked up to see Silas running toward me, his face pale and disbelief written in every line of his expression. "Elias!" he yelled, grabbing me by the shoulders as if to check I was real. "You're back. We thought. Jesus, Elias, you've been gone for 2 days. The whole county is out here. 2 days. I croaked. It had been hours for us. Maybe a day at most. We found the girl. Silas shouted to the others. Medical? We need medical over here. I set Lily down. She looked around, dazed, and then she saw them. Sarah and Mark Harper were running to the line of searchers, their faces contorted with a mixture of agony and impossible hope. Mommy! Lily screamed, breaking into a run. I watched the reunion. The way they collapsed onto the ground together, a tangle of weeping and holding on. It was the moment I lived for, the moment that justified every cold night, every blister, every fear. But as I stood there, watching them, I felt a heavy weight in my pocket. I reached in and touched the folded piece of paper Arthur had given me. I looked back at the staircase. It was gone. There was no redwood structure, no steps rising into the air, just a patch of crushed ferns and empty space. The door had closed. Elias, Silas said, standing beside me, his voice low. Where did you go? We searched this clearing 10 times. You weren't here. I looked at him, and I remembered Arthur's face. I remembered the choice they had made, and I knew that some truths were too heavy for the world to carry. We got lost, I said softly, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. We got turned around in the deep woods, but we found our way back. Silas looked at me, his eyes searching mine. He knew. He saw the shadow in my gaze, the distance that hadn't been there before. But he also knew the code of the forest. He nodded slowly. You brought her home, he said. That's what matters. Yes, I said, turning away from the empty space where the door had been. That's what matters. But as we walked back toward the command post, amidst the cheers and the relief, I knew that a part of me would never leave that silent forest. A part of me was still standing at the base of the stairs, waiting with the men who had been left behind. The days that followed my return from the woods were a strange and disorienting blur. On the surface, everything went back to normal. Lily Harper was safely home with her parents, recovering from what the doctors called exposure and mild disorientation. The local news ran a feel-good story about the heroic efforts of the Humboldt County Sheriff's Department, celebrating another successful search and rescue mission. My perfect record, once a source of quiet pride, was now intact but felt like a hollow victory, a lie I was forced to live inside. I went through the debriefing process, sitting in a sterile room under fluorescent lights, recounting my official version of events. I told them I had followed a faint trail that led me deep into an unmapped part of park. I said Lily and I had become disoriented by the dense fog and shifting terrain. We had spent 2 days finding our way back, using the creek as a landmark and conserving our energy. It was a plausible story. It was the kind of thing that happened all the time in these woods. It made sense to everyone because the truth was a story the world was not built to hear. Silas sat beside me during the debriefing, a quiet, solid presence. He would nod at certain points, corroborating a detail about the terrain or the weather. He never looked me directly in the eye, but I could feel his support, his understanding. He was my co-conspirator in this necessary silence. He had seen enough in his 30 years to know that some experiences did not fit into the neat columns of an official report. He knew the forest kept secrets, and now I was one of them. The investigators asked about the hikers from 2020, Greg, Linda, and Josh. Their car was still in the parking lot. Their families were frantic. I had to tell the hardest lie of all. I told the investigators I hadn't seen them. I said our paths had not crossed. It felt like a betrayal, but what was the alternative? To tell them their loved ones had stepped through a doorway in time and that I had come back without them? To describe a forest filled with lost souls from different decades? They would have taken my badge, my credibility, my freedom. I would have been seen as a man who had lost his mind in the woods, and my testimony would have been dismissed. The memory of Arthur and his crew would have been reduced to the ramblings of a madman. So I kept quiet. I let the official narrative solidify around me, a shell of normalcy that protected the fragile truth inside. But at night, Sleep offered no escape. I would dream of the other forest. I would see Arthur's calm, resigned face as he watched me climb the stairs. I would hear the quiet despair in the voices of his men as they spoke of the families they had lost to time. I would wake up in a cold sweat, the scent of pine and damp earth thick in my room, my hand reaching for the faded receipt I now kept in the drawer of my nightstand. A few weeks after the incident, I drove to Eureka. The address Arthur had given me for Martha Vance was in an old part town, a street lined with houses that had watched the city grow up around them. The house was still there, a small, well-kept home with a tidy garden. But the name on the mailbox was different. I gathered my courage and knocked on the door. A young woman answered, holding a baby on her hip. I introduced myself as the sheriff and explained that I was doing some historical research for the county archives. I asked if she knew anything about a family named Vance that had once lived here. She smiled politely. Vance? Oh, that was my great-grandmother's name, Martha Vance. She passed away years ago, before I was born. My grandmother told me stories about her. My heart pounded in my chest. Did she ever talk about her husband, a man named Arthur? The young woman's smile faded slightly. My great-grandfather? He was a logger. He went missing in the woods back in the 50s. They never found him. My great-grandmother waited for him her whole life. She never remarried. She always believed he would come home someday. I stood on that porch, the baby cooing softly, and felt the weight of 70 years of waiting. I felt Martha's quiet hope, the life she had lived in the shadow of a question mark. Arthur had not been forgotten. He had been loved, missed, and waited for. I am sorry for your family's loss, I said, my voice thick when an emotional woman couldn't possibly understand. It sounds like he was a good man. My grandmother said he was the best, she replied. I walked away from that house with a renewed sense of purpose. I could not save Arthur. I could not bring him back to a world that had moved on without him, but I could honor his memory. I could keep his story. That night, I sat down at my desk and began to write. I wrote down everything. The staircase, the feeling of the crossing, the younger forest, the other lost people. I described Arthur and his men, their clothes, their voices, the stories they told. I wrote about the decaying stairs and the shared sense of urgency. I wrote it all down not as a police report, but as a testimony. I folded the pages and placed them in a locked box with a faded receipt. It was a secret history of the woods, a testament to the ones who were still out there wandering between the moments. My perfect record was no longer a source of pride. It was a heavy cloak, hiding the truth of my greatest failure. I had brought one child home, but I had left so many others behind. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that my work as a sheriff had changed forever. I was no longer just a keeper of the law. I was now a keeper of secret, a guardian of a memory, and I would spend the rest of my days looking for a way to make it right. The forest had taken something from me, but had also given me something, a purpose that went beyond a clean record. It had given me a reason to keep watching, to keep listening, and to never, ever stop searching for the stairs. 5 years passed. On the surface, life in Humboldt County continued its slow, steady rhythm. The seasons turned, the tourists came and went, and the Redwoods stood silent and watchful as they always had. I continued my duties as sheriff, responding to calls, managing my team, and maintaining the peace in our quiet corner of the world. I was older now, the lines around my eyes a little deeper, my hair a little grayer at the temples. The community saw me as a steady, reliable figure, the man who had never lost a soul in the woods. They did not see the other life I lived. In my off hours, I became a different kind of searcher. I hiked the deep trails, the ones that weren't on the maps, always carrying a GPS and camera. I explored the forgotten corners of the national park, the places where the fog lay thickest and the silence was most profound. I was looking for clearings. I was looking for stairs. I never found any. It was as if the forest had closed its doors after that one, Final departure. I also spent countless hours in the county archives, poring over old records. I read missing persons reports dating back 100 years. I cross-referenced them with newspaper articles and logging company records. I found dozens of stories like Arthur's, men and women who had walked into the woods and simply vanished without a trace. Some were hikers, some were hunters, some were loggers. Their files were all stamped the same way. Case closed. Presumed deceased. But I knew better. They weren't deceased. They were displaced. They were trapped in the forest memory, wandering the seams of time, looking for a way home. I kept a private file, a secret addendum to the official history of the county, detailing every case that had the familiar hallmarks: a sudden disappearance, no tracks, no witnesses, just an inexplicable absence. The search became an obsession, a quiet current running beneath the surface of my daily life. It changed me. I became more introspective, more attuned to the subtleties of the woods. I could feel its moods in a way I never had before. Sometimes, on a quiet evening patrol, I would pull over and just listen, hoping to hear the echo of another time in the whisper of the wind. It was on one such quiet afternoon that my two lives finally intersected. A woman came to my office. She introduced herself as Dr. Evelyn Clark, a historian from the University of California, Berkeley. She was writing a book on the social history of the Northern California logging industry in the mid-20th century. She was polite, professional, and had the sharp, inquisitive eyes of someone who lived her life sorting through details others overlooked. "Sheriff Thorne," she began, setting a folder on my desk. "I've come across something in my research that I can't quite make sense of. It's an anomaly, and it involves your department." She opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of old Ranger reports from the 1960s. They were handwritten. The ink faded to a pale brown. She pointed to a specific entry dated October 1962. It was a report on a search for a missing geology student who had disappeared near the Lost Coast. "Standard report," she said. "But look at this entry from the third day of the search." I leaned forward and read the spidery script. The ranger had written about finding a set of unusual footprints near a strange clearing, and then he had mentioned a man who had helped them. The man, the report said, had appeared out of the woods, claiming to be a law enforcement officer from another area. He had helped them coordinate the search grid and had an uncanny knowledge of the terrain. The ranger noted his name, Sheriff Elias Thorne. I felt the blood drain from my face. I stared at my own name, written 60 years ago, on a piece of paper I had never seen. "It must be a different Thorne," I said, my voice hoarse. "A relative, perhaps." Dr. Clark shook her head. "I thought so, too." I checked the county records. The sheriff of Humboldt County in 1962 was a man named Peterson. There was no Sheriff Thorne in any adjacent county at that time. And according to your own public record, Sheriff, you weren't even born yet in 1962. She looked at me, her expression not accusatory, but deeply, profoundly curious. "It's impossible," she said. "And yet there it is, written down in a ranger's logbook. He even describes you. Your height, your build. He said you seemed troubled, like you were looking for something more than just the missing student." I sat back in my chair, the room feeling small and airless. The forest wasn't done with me. The story wasn't over. It wasn't a straight line. It was a circle. I had not abandoned Arthur and his men. I just hadn't saved them yet. The staircase I climbed had taken me forward, back to my own time. But what if another staircase, one I had yet to find, was waiting to take me back? "Sheriff," Dr. Clark asked, her voice pulling me back to the present, "are you all right?" I looked at the historian, at the evidence she had unknowingly brought me. She was looking for a historical footnote. She had no idea she had just handed me a map to my own future and my own past. "Dr. Clark," I said, my voice steady now, filled with a new, strange sense of clarity. "I think you and I have a great deal to talk about. The secret I had carried alone for 5 years was about to be shared. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time since I had stepped out of that other forest, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a very long time. It was a fragile, dangerous thing, but it was there, taking root in the quiet of my office. It was a feeling of hope. The journey was not over. In fact, it might have only just begun. The conversation with Dr. Evelyn Clark that afternoon marked the beginning of a strange and quiet partnership. It was not a dramatic alliance forged in crisis, but rather a slow, deliberate coming together of two minds obsessed with the same impossible truth. I told her everything. I did not hold back the details I had hidden from the official reports, nor the emotions I had buried under 5 years of silence. I told her about the staircase in the clearing, the feel of the air as it shifted between decades, and the men I had left behind in the silent woods. I told her about Arthur Vance and the promise I had made to a ghost. Evelyn listened with the intensity of a scientist observing a new phenomenon. She did not scoff. She did not call me mad. She simply took notes in a small leather-bound journal, her pen scratching across the paper in a rhythm that felt oddly comforting. When I finished, the office was dark, the sun having set long ago behind the ridgeline. "It fits," she said finally, closing her journal. "The anomalies in the logging records, the strange disappearances that cluster around certain years, the range of reports that mention phantom structures or shifts in the landscape. It has been happening for a long time, Elias, perhaps as long as the forest has been here. But why?" I asked, the question that had haunted me for years finally spoken aloud to someone who might have an answer. "Why here? Why us?" "I don't know the why," she admitted, "but I think we can figure out the how. You said the staircases were degrading, falling apart. That suggests they are not permanent features. They are events, like storms. They form, they rage, and they dissipate. And like storms, perhaps they could be predicted. Over the next few months, my life took on a new shape. By day, I was the sheriff, attending town council meetings and patrolling the highways. By night and on weekends, I was Evelyn's field agent. She worked from her office in Berkeley, using powerful computers to model weather patterns, magnetic field fluctuations, and seismic data from the last century. She was looking for a correlation, a signature that matched the dates of the known disappearances. I, meanwhile, returned to the woods. But this time, I wasn't wandering blindly. Evelyn gave me specific coordinates, places where her data suggested the veil might be thin. I carried equipment she provided, sensors that measure barometric pressure, electromagnetic fields, and things I didn't fully understand. I became a surveyor of the invisible. It was lonely work, but it felt necessary. Every time I hiked into a deep ravine or climbed a remote ridge, I felt a sense of anticipation. Was this the day? Would I turn a corner and see it standing there, the wooden steps rising into mist? And if I did, would I have the courage to climb them again? The seasons turned. Autumn bled into a wet gray winter, then blossomed into a vibrant spring. It was in late May that the first breakthrough happened. I was checking a sensor array near the headwaters of the Mad River, a place so remote that the silence felt heavy, almost physical. The device was beeping, a slow, steady pulse that grew faster as I moved north. I followed the signal, pushing through dense brush, my heart hammering against my ribs. The air began to feel charged, the hair on my arms standing up. It was the same sensation I had felt on the staircase 5 years ago. I burst into a small clearing and froze. It wasn't a staircase. Not yet. In the center of the clearing, the air itself was warping. It looked like a heat shimmer, a distortion in the fabric of the world. Through it, I could see something else, a flicker of a different forest, darker, older, and for a fleeting second, I saw a structure, stone steps, moss-covered and ancient, fading in and out of existence like a bad radio signal. I raised my camera and snapped a dozen photos. I recorded the readings on the sensors, and then, as quickly as it had begun, the shimmering stopped, the air settled, the birds began to sing again. I sent the data to Evelyn that night. She called me within the hour, her voice trembling with excitement. "We have it," she said. "The frequency, the pattern. Elias, we can map this. We can predict where the next one will open." And when I added, "Yes, and when," this knowledge changed everything. We were no longer helpless witnesses to a tragedy. We were watchers. We could warn people. We could close off trails before a storm hit. We could save them before they were ever lost. But there was a deeper, more dangerous thought that took root in my mind. If we could predict the openings, could we use them? Could I go back? Not to 1952. I knew that door was likely closed forever. But to 1962, to the time of the Rangers' report, to the moment where history said, I had already been. The loop, the circle, it was waiting for me. I began to prepare, not just as a sheriff, but as a traveler. I kept the pack ready in my truck, filled with supplies that would last for days, and clothes that were simple and timeless enough to pass in another decade. I waited for the call from Evelyn. I waited for the forest to open its door one more time. The call came 2 years later. I was sitting on my porch, watching a summer storm roll in from the ocean, when the phone rang. It was Evelyn. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Sector 4, she said. "The ridge above the old logging road. The data is spiking, Elias. It's going to be a big one, a stable one." When I asked, already standing up, my keys in my hand. "Tomorrow morning. Dawn. It should last for maybe an hour. After that, the window closes for we don't know how long. Maybe years." I didn't sleep that night. I drove to the trailhead in the dark, parking my truck deep in the shadows of the trees. I hiked up the ridge by the light of the moon, my pack heavy on my shoulders. The forest felt alive around me, the wind whispering through the branches in a language I had almost learned to speak. I reached the location just as the sky began to lighten to a bruised purple. It was a high meadow, filled with wildflowers that looked gray in the pre-dawn light. And there, standing in the center, was a staircase. It was magnificent. It was made of white stone, marble perhaps, glowing softly in the dim light. It spiraled upward 12 steps, ending in a wide platform. It looked ethereal, like something from a myth, yet it was undeniably real. The grass around its base was flattened, as if it had landed there with great weight. I checked my sensors. The readings were off the charts. The electromagnetic field was humming. This was it. The door was open, but I wasn't alone. From the trees on the other side of the meadow, a figure emerged. It was a young woman, a hiker by the looks of her gear. She had a camera around her neck and a look of wonder on her face. She was walking straight toward the stairs, drawn by their impossible beauty, just as Lily had been drawn by the butterfly. "Stop!" I shouted, stepping out from the tree line. She jumped, startled, and turned to look at me. "Oh, I didn't know anyone was here. Isn't this amazing? Is an art piece." I walked toward her, keeping my hands visible, my voice calm. "It's not art," I said, "and it's not safe. You need to step away from it." She looked at me, then back at the stairs. The pull was strong. I could see it in her eyes. The curiosity, the desire to climb, to see, to know. "I just want to get a photo from the top," she said, taking a step closer. "The view must be incredible." "The view is not what you think it is," I said, stopping a few feet from her. "Please, I am the sheriff. I am telling you to step back." She hesitated, looking at my badge, then at the stairs. "Sheriff? Out here? What's going on?" "It's unstable," I lied, using the only truth that she might accept. "The structure is compromised. It could collapse at any moment." She looked disappointed, but the authority in my voice reached her. She lowered her camera. Okay, I'm sorry. I just, I've never seen anything like it. I know, I said gently. It has that effect. But you need to go. Now, head back down the trail. Don't look back. She nodded slowly, backing away. Okay, I'm going. I watched her disappear into the trees, waiting until the sound of her footsteps faded completely. I had saved one. It wasn't Arthur, but it was someone. I turned back to the marble staircase. It was glowing brighter now as the sun began to crest the mountains. This was my chance. Evelyn's data said this door was stable. It could take me where? When? I walked to the base of the steps. I placed my hand on the cool stone. I felt the vibration, the hum of power. I could climb. I could step through. I could find the 1960s. I could fulfill the history Dr. Clark had found. I could complete the circle. But then I thought of Lily. She was growing up now, a teenager, living a normal life because I had brought her back. I thought of Evelyn, waiting by her computer for my call. I thought of the young woman I had just turned away. If I left, who would stand guard? Who would be here for the next one? Who would warn the wanderers? I realized then that the Ranger's report from 1962 might not be a destiny I had to fulfill, but a warning of a path I didn't have to take. Maybe there was another version of me, in another timeline, who had climbed the stairs, but that didn't mean I had to be him. I took my hand off the stone. Not today. I whispered to the silent forest. Not today. I sat down in the grass, watching the staircase as the sun rose. I watched it shimmer, watched the light play off the marble, and then as the hour passed, I watched it fade. It didn't crumble like the others. It simply became transparent, less and less real, until it was just a ghost of a shape, and then nothing, just an empty meadow in the morning light. I keyed my radio, which I knew wouldn't reach the station, but would record my voice. Event concluded. I said, no casualties. Sector secure. I hiked back down the mountain with a lighter heart than I had felt in years. I hadn't found Arthur. I hadn't traveled through time. But I had found my place. I wasn't just a searcher anymore. I was a guardian. I was the keeper of the threshold. As long as I stood watch, as long as I worked with Evelyn to map the storms, fewer people would be lost. The forest would always have its secrets. It would always have its doors. But now it also had a watchman, and that I decided was enough. 5 more years passed, and my hair had turned fully gray. The forest had become my life in a way I could never have explained to the young man I was when I first pinned on the sheriff's badge. I still maintained the official facade of my role, but my true work happened in the quiet hours, guided by Evelyn's predictions and my own intimate knowledge of the terrain. We had become efficient. Evelyn would call with a location and probability window, and I would be there, waiting. Sometimes I would find nothing but wind and empty space. Sometimes I would find a shimmering distortion of air that signaled a door trying to form but failing. And sometimes, rare and breathtaking, I would find a staircase standing solid in the dawn light. I had turned away 7 people in 5 years. 7 hikers who had stumbled upon the impossible and were moments away from stepping out of their own lives. I had guided them away with lies about structural instability or restricted areas. I watched them walk back to the safety of their cars, oblivious to the fact that they had stood on the precipice of eternity. I was a shepherd of the mundane, guarding the fence line of reality. But the forest, I learned, is not a static thing. It evolves. And so, do the people who get lost in it. It was a Tuesday in November when Evelyn called. Her voice was different this time. Tighter, faster. Sector 8, she said. The deep valley near the old mill ruins. Elias, the readings are strange. It's not just a spike. It's a signal, a repeating pattern. Someone isn't just opening a door. Someone is knocking. I drove to the mill ruins under a sky the color of slate. The rain was falling in a steady, hushed curtain, turning the forest floor into a sponge of moss and mud. The ruins were little more than moss-covered stone foundations now, the ghosts of industries swallowed by the green. I set up my equipment near the main wall. The sensors went wild immediately. The needle on the electromagnetic meter was dancing, and then I saw it. It wasn't a staircase this time. It was a doorway, a literal door frame made of polished mahogany, standing upright in the mud, complete with a brass handle. It looked warm, inviting, like the entrance to a cozy study, except it opened onto wet ferns and rain. But there was someone standing in front of it. She was wearing a heavy coat and had a complex-looking device strapped to her chest, wires trailing from it to a metal rod she had driven into the ground. She was adjusting dials with frantic precision. She looked up as I approached, and I stopped dead. I knew her face. I had seen it in the missing persons files I had memorized years ago. Elena Rostova. I said, the name tasting like dust in my mouth. Missing since 1978. She froze, her hand hovering over a dial. She looked older than the photo in the file, of course. In the photo, she was 24, a bright-eyed hiker. The woman before me was in her late 60s, her face mapped with lines of deep thought and hard years. But the eyes were the same, sharp, intelligent, and currently filled with a fierce determination. "You know my name," she said. Her voice was raspy and used to speaking. Are you real? Or another echo? I am real, I said, stepping closer, hands raised. I am Elias Thorne, the sheriff. She let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. A sheriff. Finally, I calculated a 14% chance of interception by local authorities. I am glad to see the probability models were pessimistic. Elena, I asked gently, where have you been? You've been gone for over 40 years. 40 years here, she corrected, tapping the device on her chest. 12 years for me. Time is sticky. It doesn't flow in straight lines where I've been. I've been in the waiting room, the spaces between. But I found a way out. Not back to 1978. That path is closed. But out. She looked at the mahogany door frame. This is my exit. But I needed an anchor. I needed someone on this side to observe it. Quantum entanglement requires an observer. You are observing me, aren't you, Sheriff? I see you, I said. I see the door. Good. Then it exists. She turned the dial, and the space inside the doorframe shimmered. Instead of rain and ferns, I saw a laboratory. Clean white walls, black countertops, the hum of machinery. It looked like a university lab, perhaps in the late 90s or early 2000s. This leads to 2015, she said. I have colleagues there, or I will have. I have done the math. If I step through now, I arrive then. I can verify my own research. I can stop myself from going into the woods in the first place. Wait, I said, stepping forward. If you stop yourself, then you never go in. You never learn this. You create a paradox. She smiled a sad, wise smile. Paradoxes are just the universe's way of editing a rough draft. I am tired of being a draft. Elias, I want to be a final version. Can you help others? I asked, the thought of Arthur Vance surging to the front of my mind. There are people trapped, men from 1952, a family from 1993. Can you bring them out? Elena looked at me with sympathy. I saw them, she said softly. The loggers, the family. I saw them in the mist. They are safe, in their way. They have built a community in the pockets of stable time. They are not suffering. They are just elsewhere, but I cannot bring them. My device is calibrated for one mass, one specific temporal signature. If I try to carry more, the field collapses. We will be scattered across the centuries like confetti. The rain intensified, drumming against the mahogany wood. But you can do something for me, she said. Keep watching. Keep the log. The data matters. One day, the doors will stop opening. The forest will heal the scar. Until then, witness us." She reached out and turned the brass handle. The door opened. The smell of ozone and antiseptic rushed out, overpowering the scent of the rain. "Goodbye, Sheriff," she said. "Thank you for being real." She stepped through. The door slammed shut behind her with a sound like a thunderclap, and then the frame simply dissolved. It didn't crumble. It turned into mist and drifted away on the wind. The clearing was empty. Elena Rostova was gone, not to 1978, but to a new life in 2015. She had saved herself. I stood in the rain for a long time, staring at the empty space. I felt a profound sense of loss, but also a strange new hope. She had escaped. It was possible. The forest was a prison, yes, but it wasn't perfect. There were cracks in the walls. I hiked back to my truck, my mind racing. I needed to tell Evelyn. We needed to recalibrate our search. We weren't just looking for staircases anymore. We were looking for escapees. The encounter with Elena Rostova changed the nature of my work with Evelyn. It validated everything we had suspected but couldn't prove, that the phenomenon was survivable, navigable, and deeply rooted in physics rather than folklore. Evelyn was ecstatic when I showed her the readings from Elena's departure. She built a temporal beacon, Evelyn said, looking at the jagged lines on the graph, in a cave or a cabin. With whatever scrap she could find, she built a machine to focus the field. She's a genius. She's a survivor. I corrected. We redoubled our efforts. Evelyn brought in 2 graduate students she trusted implicitly, Sarah and David. We expanded our sensor network. We were no longer just a sheriff and a historian. We were a team. We called ourselves the Threshold Project, a name that felt official enough to be real, but vague enough to be meaningless to anyone else. My role shifted from observer to active participant. Evelyn designed a portable version of the sensor array that I could wear like a vest. It would vibrate when I was near a thinning of the veil, allowing me to find the anomalies faster. I spent days at a time in the deep woods, camping under the stars, feeling more at home among the trees than I did in my own living room. It was during one of these long patrols that I found the boy. It was summer, dry and hot. The forest was crackling with tension, the smell of pine resin heavy in the air. My vest buzzed near a dry riverbed in the southern quadrant. I followed the pull, expecting a staircase or a door. Instead, I found a young man sitting on a rock, weeping. He looked to be about 20. He was wearing clothes that were torn and dirty, jeans that were shredded at the cuffs, a t-shirt that had once been white, but was now stained with mud and berries. He looked up when I approached, terror in his eyes. "Don't hurt me," he stammered. "I don't know where I am." "I'm not going to hurt you," I said, keeping my distance. "I'm Elias. I'm here to help." He looked at my uniform, at the badge. "A cop? Thank God. Please, you have to tell me, did the war start?" I paused. "What war?" "The war," he said, his eyes wide. "The missiles. I was hiking. I saw the flash. I ran into the cave, and then I was here. But it's been weeks. I haven't seen any planes. Is it over?" I looked at his clothes again. The t-shirt had a faded print of a band I recognized, a band that was popular now, in my time. "What year do you think it is?" I asked gently. 2024, he said. "August." I checked my watch. It was July 2025. "Son," I said, sitting down on a rock opposite him, "there is no war. There were no missiles. You stepped through something. A rough patch in the woods." "No!" He shook his head violently. "I saw it. The sky was on fire." I realized then what had happened. He hadn't come from the past. He hadn't come from my present. He had come from a potential future, or a different timeline altogether, a reality where things had gone wrong. "Listen to me," I said. "You are safe here. It is 2025. The world is fine. You are in Humboldt County." He stared at me, his breathing shallow. 2025? So, I missed it? Or I skipped it? I don't know. I admit it, but I know people who might. I took him to Evelyn. It was a risk, bringing a civilian into the fold, but I couldn't leave him in the woods, and I couldn't turn him over to the regular authorities. He would be institutionalized. Evelyn and her students set him up in a guest room at her house. They listened to his story. They compared his memories with current events. It turned out he was from a timeline that had diverged from ours only slightly, but catastrophically, in his world. A diplomatic crisis had escalated. In ours, it had been resolved. The staircase he had found, or rather, the cave he had run into, had acted as a bridge not between times, but between possibilities. He's a refugee, Evelyn said later, as we sat in her kitchen. A refugee from a reality that broke. Can we send him back? I asked. To a war zone, she countered. Why would we? He's safe here. His DNA matches a student at Santa Cruz who went missing last year. In this timeline, he just vanished. If he returns, he gets his life back. A better life. But it's not his life, I argued. It's a version of it. It's close enough, she said. Elias, we can't fix the universe. We can only patch the holes. We helped the boy, his name was Mark, reintegrate. It was difficult. He had memories of a trauma that hadn't happened here, but he was resilient. He reunited with his parents, who wept to see their lost son returned. They didn't question the gaps in his memory or his strange scars. They were just happy he was home. Seeing Mark with his parents brought back the memory of Lily Harper. I realized that my work was evolving again. I wasn't just guarding the threshold. I was managing the traffic. I was a border agent for the impossible. And I wasn't alone. Elena Rostova had been right. There were others. Mark had mentioned seeing a woman in the woods, a woman with a strange device who pointed him toward the riverbed where I found him. She told me to wait for the sheriff. Mark said. She said you would come. Elena was still out there. Or rather than there, she hadn't just escaped. She was helping from the other side. She was guiding the lost souls to the one person she knew would be watching. The realization filled me with a warmth I hadn't expected. We were an alliance. Me in the present, Evelyn in the lab, Elena in the past, or wherever she was, and the others like Arthur who held the line in the deep woods. We were a chain of hands reaching across time, refusing to let people fall into the dark. I returned to the forest with a new sense of peace. I wasn't fighting the woods anymore. I was working with them. The stairs, the doors, the mists, they were dangerous, yes, but they were also bridges, and as long as there were bridges, there was a way home. 10 years had passed since I climbed the first staircase. 10 years of secrets, of quiet patrols, of watching the seasons paint the forest in endless cycles of green and gold and gray. I was nearing retirement now. The badge felt heavier on my chest, not from burden, but from the sheer volume of history it represented. I was preparing to hand over the reins of the department to a younger generation, but I knew my real work, the work of the Threshold Project, would never truly end. It was a quiet Tuesday when the package arrived. It came by regular mail, wrapped in brown paper, addressed simply to Sheriff Elias Thorne, personal. There was no return address. I opened at my desk, the afternoon sun slanting through the blinds, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Inside was a leather-bound journal. It was old, the cover cracked and worn, smelling of mildew and time. I opened the first page and felt the world tilt on its axis. The handwriting was mine, but it wasn't the handwriting of the man sitting at the desk. It was shakier, rushed, the script of a man writing in difficult conditions. The date at the top of the first entry was October 14th, 1962. My heart hammered against my ribs. I turned the pages, reading entries that described a life I hadn't lived, or hadn't lived yet. The journal detailed the experiences of an Elias Thorne who had stepped through a door and found himself in the past. It spoke of his confusion, his eventual acceptance, and his decision to help the Rangers of that time using his future knowledge. It described how I had quietly guided search teams away from dangerous anomalies, how he had saved lives from the shadows. And then, halfway through the book, there was an entry that made me weep. I found them today. Arthur and his boys. They are camped near the Blue Ridge. They look tired, but they are together. I brought them supplies. I told them about the future. I told Arthur that his wife kept waiting. He cried. We sat by the fire and talked about Elias Thorne, the young sheriff who would one day try to save them. I told him not to worry. I told him the circle is holding. I closed the book, my hands trembling. The loop was real. Dr. Clark's discovery of the Ranger report years ago had been the first breadcrumb. This journal was the loaf. Somewhere in my future, there was a door I would choose to take. I wouldn't take it to escape or to explore. I would take it to go back and care for the ones I had left behind. I understood now why I hadn't found Arthur in the present. I hadn't found him because I was already with him in the past. The older version of me, the one who wrote this journal, had gone back to be their guardian. I hadn't abandoned them. I had spent a lifetime, another lifetime, keeping my promise. That evening, I drove to Evelyn's house. I showed her the journal. She examined it with the reverence of an archaeologist unearthing a holy text. Carbon dating would confirm it, she whispered, touching the yellow pages. But I don't need it. The ink, the phrasing. Elias, this is you. A version of you that accepted the call. Does this mean I have to go? I asked, looking out her window at the darkening sky. Is my future set in stone? Do I have to find a staircase and step back to 1962? Evelyn looked at me, her eyes full of wisdom. Time isn't a straight line, remember? It's a forest. Maybe you go back. Maybe you don't. Maybe this journal is a gift from potentiality, a way of letting you know that in at least one version of the story, Arthur wasn't alone. Maybe that's enough. I thought about that. I thought about the burden of guilt I had carried for a decade, the feeling that I had chosen Lily over Arthur. This journal absolved me. It told me that the universe was kinder than I imagined. It allowed for a reality where I saved the child and stood by the lost men. I think, I said slowly, that I will choose to stay. I think my work is here, with the people who are finding the doors today. But I will keep this book. I will keep it as a reminder that no one is truly lost. Evelyn smiled and poured us tea. We sat in silence, two watchers of the impossible, comforted by the evidence of a love that transcended time. The loop wasn't a trap. It was an embrace. It was the universe's way of saying that nothing is wasted, that every promise is eventually kept, even if it takes a lifetime or two to keep it. I went home that night and placed the journal in the box next to Arthur's receipt and my own notes. The collection was growing. It was a library of the unseen, a testament to the endurance of the human spirit in the face of the inexplicable. I slept soundly for the first time in years, the faces of the lost men finally fading from my nightmares, replaced by the image of a campfire in 1962, where an old friend was telling them they were not forgotten. The years flowed on, swift and relentless as a river. I retired from the force, handed my badge to a young woman named Martinez who had the same sharp eyes and quiet respect for the woods that I once had. I didn't tell her about the stairs. Some burdens are too heavy to inherit immediately, but I told her to trust her instincts, to listen to the silence, and to call me if she ever found something she couldn't explain. I spent my retirement working with Evelyn and the Threshold Project. We had mapped the major convergence points. We had discreetly influenced the Park Service to close certain trails during storm seasons. We saved people without them ever knowing they were in danger. It was a good life, a quiet, purposeful life. Then came the invitation. It was heavy cream cardstock, embossed with gold letters. The marriage of Lily Harper and James Miller. Lily was 28 now. The little girl in the pink jacket had grown into a woman. I hadn't seen her in years. Her parents had moved away shortly after the incident, wanting to put the trauma of the woods behind them. But they had remembered me. The wedding was held at a vineyard in Sonoma, miles away from the deep forests of Humboldt. It was a beautiful, sun-drenched day. Lily looked radiant in white, laughing with her bridesmaids, dancing with her father. I stood at the back, holding a glass of sparkling water, feeling like a ghost who had been invited to the feast of the living. During the reception, Lily saw me. Her face lit up, and she walked over, leaving her new husband for a moment. She hugged me, a fierce, solid hug that reminded me of the terrified child clinging to my waist on the staircase. "Sheriff Thorne," she said, pulling back to look at me. "I'm so glad you came. I wasn't sure you would." "I wouldn't miss it, Lily," I said. "You look happy." "I am," she said. Then her expression shifted. The smile remained, but her eyes grew serious, older than her years. She leaned in close, lowering her voice so the guests nearby couldn't hear. "I remember, she whispered. "My parents think I forgot. They think it was just a bad dream or shock. But I remember the stairs. I remember the other forest. I remember the man named Arthur." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the breeze. "You do?" "Yes," she said. "And I remember you carrying me down. You saved my life. Elias, you gave me all of this." She gestured to the party, the lights, the joy. "Thank you. It was my job." I said, my voice thick. "No." She shook her head. "It was a choice." She paused, looking around to make sure we were private. "There's something else. Last month, James and I were hiking. In Oregon, just a day trip. We went off the trail to find a waterfall." My stomach tightened. "Lily, I didn't climb them," she said quickly, "but I saw them. Stone steps, leading up a cliff face that went nowhere. I stopped James. I made us turn around. But before we left, I saw something carved into the bottom step." She looked at me, her eyes wide and searching. It said, "Lily was here, 2030. I stared at her. The date was 5 years in the future. "I didn't carve it," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I haven't been there. Not yet." I took her hands. They were warm, alive. "And you won't go," I said firmly. "You saw the warning. You turned back. That carving, it's from a possible future. When you just avoided. You changed the path, Lily. You recognized the sign." She let out a long breath, her shoulders relaxing. "You think so?" "I know so," I said. "The forest tries to call us back. It remembers us. But we have the power to say no." "You said no." She squeezed my hands. "I did. I chose this." She looked back at her husband, who was waving at her from the dance floor. "I chose to stay." "Good," I said. "Keep choosing to stay." She kissed my cheek and went back to her wedding, back to her life of light and noise and love. I watched her go, a profound sense of peace settling over me. The cycle could be broken. The loop could be severed. We were not slaves to the forest timeline. We were travelers who could choose our own destination. I left the party as the sun went down. I drove back north, toward the Redwoods, toward home. The journal sat on the passenger seat beside me. The mystery wasn't over. Lily's story proved that the forest would always reach out, always try to pull us in. But we were learning. We were getting stronger. I arrived at my cabin and stood on the porch, listening to the vast, breathing silence of the woods. I wasn't afraid anymore. I thought of Arthur, waiting by his fire in 1962. I thought of Elena, working in her lab in 2015. I thought of Lily, dancing in 2025. And I thought of myself, the old watchman, standing here in the center of it all. I took a deep breath of the pine-scented air. "I'm still here," I whispered to the trees. "And I'm watching." The wind rustled the branches in reply, a sound like 1,000 pages turning at once. The story continued. The stairs would appear again. But as long as I had breath in my body, I would be there to meet them. I was Elias Thorne, the keeper of the forest, and for the first time in a long time, I was exactly where I belonged,